This week, South African police announced that charges would be withdrawn against the man they arrested on suspicion of being involved in the shooting of Bafana Bafana and Orlando Pirates captain Senzo Meyiwa. I'm joined on the line by the Wits Radio Academy's Paul McNally, who investigated this issue on this week's episode of The Science Inside. Paul, thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much for having me.
Now, it was a really interesting episode this week as you looked at the forensics and the science behind finding somebody who's committed a crime with a gun. But you started off by chatting to forensic expert Dr. David Klatzow, who kind of, I suppose, dampened a lot of our views on what we thought happens when police investigate gunshots.
Yeah, he's an incredible force in the field, but also not afraid to acknowledge when something isn't really working. And he went into the idea of matching bullets and guns, and that's something that we've sort of seen in movies again and again. And he really went through how, first of all, if you've got, if a bullet has been shot, and it's say it's been shot into a wall or perhaps into a person or something like that, you've got evidence there. And there is the opportunity to then get hold of a gun. And, the way that we see it in films and how we sort of imagine it is that therefore you're able to match these bullets and guns really easily. And he went into the science around that in how that each bullet is, each gun gives a certain number of scratches onto a bullet when it's shot. And that is almost like thinking of it like a fingerprint. So a gun basically leaves a fingerprint on every single bullet, and therefore you're able to trace these things. But it's under fire. As you can imagine, it sounds very far-fetched, and even though many people have gone to jail in America to their death over this kind of research and this ballistics evidence, it's not necessarily true. So yeah, it was very interesting the way he explored that very common idea of matching bullets and guns, and how perhaps at the moment it's sort of under fire.
I always try to chuckle to myself when I listen to the episode because he really didn't mince his words about the South African police service and what he feels police are doing to really let down the criminal justice system.
Yeah, I mean, especially from a guy who's looking at the evidence and the ballistics, he's kind of wants to be the first person on the scene, right? He wants to be able to be looking at the evidence without any kind of contamination. And you're right, we interviewed him a few months ago for the Oscar forensics as well, and he is, to say jaded about the fact that this evidence is quite contaminated often in South African systems.
Then you went on to speak about something that is very interesting but also kind of terrifying, and that's the idea that we can make plastic guns by ourselves at home.
Yeah, I mean, well, part of it we wanted to latch on to the idea that you can 3D print a gun. And often people, I think, have thought about 3D printing through that idea. So the idea that, yes, 3D printing is a thing, and basically it's only used to make weapons. So we wanted to start with that as an idea, but then also expand to the fact that 3D printing is here to stay, and also it can be used for really so many more things. I mean, we spoke to someone who laid out how they can use it to print prosthetic limbs, which I thought was amazing.
Now, bringing it back to the Senzo case, of course, this week we saw that a man who was arrested and police believed that he was involved in the shooting has now been let go because of insufficient evidence. And really, the show highlights how really difficult it is to get evidence off a shooting crime scene.
Yeah, I mean, Klatzow was very specific in that what you really want, I think the way he worded it was that you want someone to shoot perfectly and straight, and for it to go straight through the body and then to bounce into a pillow. And then you'd have this perfect bullet matched with this perfect gun, and you'd have this perfect trajectory. And he went into in the show in some quite detail about how you trace trajectories and how you guess where a shooter was standing. But he also adds that obviously is never how you want it to be, and the sort of science around looking at evidence and making, like he says, like using your mind to analyze a scene is very complicated.
Like in every episode this week, you looked at the science behind some movies and tried to debunk some of the really fantastic things that we see in films. This week, you looked at whether you'd be able to get out of a vehicle that had been plunged into water. So without giving too much away, can you talk to us about that?
Yes, needless to say that me and my co-presenter Lutfia, we disagreed on how easy this was. She laid out how you can do it and how obviously you see in a film often someone drives into the sea or into a lake and they're able to sort of get out of a car and swim up to the surface. And yeah, it is possible. But yeah, she thought that it was way more difficult than I did.
Yeah, Paul, I've listened to the episode and I think you severely underestimate how possible it is.
Yeah.
We'll just keep hoping that nobody's ever in that type of a situation, though.
Yeah, I'm hoping.
That's the Wits Radio Academy's Paul McNally. You can listen to the full episode of this week's edition of The Science Inside. It's underneath this video, and the question posed by The Science Inside this week was, would you own a gun and where would you keep it? Let us know in the comment section below.